going to either fill that cash flow need by borrowing, or if we've got excess cash, we can pay it down. So I want to look at all the changes in my cash flow statement except my change in the revolver. We'll then use the revolver to balance out our cash to help get our balance sheet back into balance. All right. Formula-wise, what this formula is going to be is equals cash from operations plus cash from investing plus, and I don't want to say cash from financing because that includes the revolver. Remember, this is change in cash before the revolver. So I want to say plus change in term loan plus change in unsecured debt plus my beginning cash. Right? Because if I start the year with some excess cash on my balance sheet, I have a cash flow shortfall. Well, I can use balance sheet cash first to fund that before I start looking to my credit card or to my revolver. All right, so again, the formula here should be H93 plus H98 plus H102 plus H103 plus H108. And this measures all possible changes in cash with the exception of my revolver. When you hit enter, you should get minus 119.6 in year one. And we're going to come back to this in a moment when we calculate how much we need to borrow or how much we can pay down on a revolver. All right, so I'll show you how we integrate that in a second. Does everybody understand what we've done thus far, though? Well, now that we have that, we can start working on our revolver. And again, like I said earlier when we were talking about beginning cash, beginning revolver balance is equal to last year's ending revolver balance. So what I'm going to say here is equals G117. I want to reference that $40.8 million ending revolver balance last year. And now we're going to show you how to figure out how much to pay down or how much to draw, how much to borrow on our revolver, our credit card. Again, if your numbers are off a little bit, yeah, don't worry too much. First of all, hit F9, make sure your numbers are truly off. But if they are off a little bit, keep doing this. We can figure that out later. I want to make sure you understand this more than anything. And now in our pay down drawdown line, this is really the keystone to our whole model. This is what ties our entire model together. This is what solves that circular logic that we had on the board earlier and allows us to get our balance sheet back in balance. And what I want you to do is type the following. I'm going to explain it in a minute. I want you to type minus MIN, minus min, left parenthesis, H112, comma H115. Right parenthesis, hit enter. All right, so minus min, open parentheses, H112, comma H115, close parenthesis. Make sure you have a minus sign on the front of this. Does everyone have that? All right, now let's explain what that is. What is, when I say min, what do I mean? Minimum. All right, that's telling Excel we're going to use a minimum function. All right, so it's telling Excel, let's ignore the minus sign for a minute. Take the minimum of either H112 or H115. Whichever number is lower, give me that. If we look at these two numbers, obviously minus 119.6 is a lot lower than 40.8. So the minimum of those two is minus 119.6. Now take the negative of that, which gives us a positive 119.6. All right, in layman's terms, in English, what it's saying is if we need cash, that is, if our change in cash flow before revolver is negative, it means we need cash, borrow that amount. Okay, if it's positive, then we can pay down some of our revolver if we have a balance. If it's positive and we have no balance, then we're not going to borrow, and that positive cash is just going to go back on the balance sheet. We'll see examples of both of those two latter scenarios that I just described as we go on. These numbers are going to keep changing. I'll come back to this and show you that. But for now, recognize that this formula says if we need cash, if we have a cash flow deficit here, borrow that amount. Get us to cash equals 0 on our balance sheet. All right, so now my ending revolver balance, and once I calculate my ending balance, remember it's going to go back up on the balance sheet. That change will run through the cash flow statement, and our numbers are going to adjust. All right, so let's first calculate the ending balance, just the sum of the two numbers above. Beginning balance plus or minus any pay down drawdown. I can use all the equals here. My ending balance should be 160.3. When I hit F9 to recalc, look what's happened to my ending cash. It's gone back to 0. I've borrowed enough so that I've gotten back to 0 cash on my balance sheet. Can't have negative. I've gotten back to 0. Now, if I had some minimum cash balance that I needed to maintain, maybe a bank requires it, or maybe it's just company corporate finance policy, we need to keep $25 million of cash on our balance sheet every year, we could model that in. Right? We could add another 25 to this, or subtract another 25 actually. Right? So you can model minimum cash, a little beyond the scope of what we're doing here. I just want to make sure everybody sees how this worked. I've borrowed enough cash to get back to 0. It's real. I mean, that is the keystone of the model. If anybody's ever built a model without using this, and that's how I learned how to build a model, was I kind of trial and error, beating my head against the wall. Usually what it involves is a lot of if-then statements to figure out basically what we just solved in two cells here. Very long, very complicated if-then statements. And then as you change your model, you've got to change some of the links in your if-then, and it can be, I've spent hours, I've spent days and nights working on if statements. You don't need it. If you know how to do this, you can model in a very simple, straightforward fashion and still accomplish the same thing. Right? We can copy this across now too. And when we hit F9 to recalc, now we see we're at 0 cash in every year. Pretty cool. Okay, and let's actually look out to year 2 and beyond, because now we've got a little different situation than what we had in year 1. All right, if we look to year 2, instead of a big negative number, now we see a positive number. What that tells us is before we look to our revolver, we've got a cash flow surplus. We've got some excess cash, which means we can pay down a revolver balance if we have one. So our minus min formula here, take the minimum of these two, 30.8 million, take the negative of that, says we can pay down 30.8 million. We can't pay down more than that because our cash flow surplus is only 38 million, but we can pay down up to that amount. And that's what our formula does. We pay down 30.8 million, which drops our revolver balance to 129.5. Years 3, 4, and 5, similar situations, we can pay down a little bit of our revolver each year. And that's what our model does. Everybody see that? Okay. Again, these numbers will continue to evolve as we update the model, but for right now, that's the interpretation of what we have up there. All right, well, that's as hard as it gets. All right, if we've gotten through that, everything else is pretty easy to model, pretty easy to understand. All right, and that's probably the most valuable lesson we can take away from here is this saves us a lot of time not having to do those if statements. All right, so now let's calculate the interest on our revolver. In order to do that, we need an interest rate. First thing we need is our interest rate from our assumptions tab. So we'll say equals, control page up. I want to get the interest rate for year 1 on my revolver, 6.25%. Cell H40 on the assumptions tab. And now that I have that, I can calculate interest expense. The one twist here is that interest is calculated using an average balance. All right. It's typically how banks do it. They'll usually do an average monthly, sometimes an average weekly balance, depending on how it's set up, but usually based on an average balance rather than taking the interest rate and multiplying it by the ending balance. I would assume that this amount's outstanding the whole year, and it's probably not the case. Company's probably borrowing in increments throughout the year. So the way we do this, we say equals average, open parentheses, H115, comma, H117. So take the average of the beginning and the ending balance, close parenthesis, times the interest rate. So take the average balance, multiply it by our interest rate, should give you 6.3 million of interest so far. And once you have those, you can fill those both across to the right. And when you hit F9, all your numbers are going to change a little bit. All right, your interest rates will go up a little, that interest expense every year. All right, let's do the term loan. Just like before, term loan beginning balance equal to last year's ending balance. So for my beginning balance, I'm going to say equals G124. Now, pay down, drawdown, we're not doing any minus min formulas here for the term loan. We only do that for the revolver. The term loan amortization, again, is going to be based off of what we hard-coded onto our assumptions tab. All right, because it's an outflow of cash, I want to have that noted as a negative. So what I want to say here is minus, control page up, H44 on the assumptions tab. Because I've set that up as a negative, I can take the sum of those two, that is beginning balance, and my pay down. I can use alt equals to calculate my ending balance. So at the end of year one, it's 80 million. Interest rate, just like with a revolver, we're going to pull that from our assumptions tab. So equals control page up, H41 on the assumptions tab, that's 6.75%. So you should have a beginning balance of 100 million, amortization of 20, ending balance of 80, interest rate of 6.75%. And then just like the revolver, interest expense will be calculated using an average balance. And actually, because we've set this up identically to how our revolver schedule is set up in terms of the order of these items, I can just copy this formula, paste it down here, save myself a little time from having to retype that average formula. So I can go up to cell H119, control C to copy, scroll down to H126, control V to paste, F9 to recalc. And once you have all 5 of those, you can fill to the right, F9 to recalc again. And what's interesting is that our revolver numbers have changed again. We've added more data to the model. We've added more data into our term loan section of the debt schedule. That's gotten populated up in our balance sheet. That's run through our cash flow statement now, which gets taken into account when we look at this change in cash before revolver. All right, now in year one, instead of needing 119.6 million, we only need 39.6. And so that's what our revolver is doing. It's borrowing 39.6, and then in each of the 4 successive years, we're paying down up to the amount of our excess cash flow. And once we update our unsecured debt in our debt schedule, it will further update the numbers in our revolver. And then when we link our interest expense into our income statement, it will further update the numbers. You should be seeing a pattern. All these numbers are dependent upon one another. It's what Excel calls that circular reference. Any questions before we do the unsecured piece? Let's do the last piece of our debt, then we'll total our interest expense, we'll calculate our interest on cash, then we're done. All right, so we're almost there. Unsecured debt ending or beginning balance is equal to last year's ending balance, so equals G131. Pay down, drawdown, just like with our term loan, I want to say minus, control page up, H45 on the assumptions tab. I know we don't have any amortization, but again, if we change the terms of that debt, we want to update it here and automatically have it flow through the model. So it's important to set it up properly. Minus H45 on the assumptions tab. Ending balance, we can do Alt equals the sum of the beginning balance and any pay downs or drawdowns. Interest rate, linked to our assumptions tab, equals H42 on the assumptions tab, that 12%. And interest expense, same way we calculated for the revolver, same way we did it for the term loan. We can actually just copy that formula down because we've got the same order in our unsecured debt section as above. Control C to copy, Control V to paste. We can fill those across, hit F9 to recalc. And what we should see so far is we've got a beginning balance of 50, no pay downs and drawdowns, so our ending balance stays the same every year, 50 million. We're paying interest at 12%, 50 times 12%, 6 million a year in interest. And like I promised, once we updated our unsecured piece, that updated in the balance sheet, that updated in the cash flow statement, which means now it's updated as far as the revolver is concerned. So now we actually, instead of needing cash in year one, we have a little excess cash. All right, so now instead of needing cash, we've got some excess cash. In all 5 years, we're paying down as much excess cash as we have. Okay, until year 4, we've got 13.9 million of excess cash, but we only have a revolver balance of 7.2 million at the time. So there's no sense in paying down more than we owe. The minus min formula automatically takes that into account. We only pay down what we owe. We pay down 7.2. We put the balance back up on the balance sheet as ending cash, 6.7 million. And then in year 5, we generate a cash surplus of 22.2. Okay, it all goes back onto the balance sheet. We end with 22.2. The last couple steps we have here, we still need to total our interest expense. We need to add it up for all 3 pieces of debt. Once we do that down here, remember we linked to this earlier in our income statement. So it'll update through our income statement, update our net income, flow through the cash flow, and update our numbers yet again. So total interest expense is just the sum of interest for our revolver, H119, our term loan, H126, and our unsecured piece, H133. You add the 3 of those up, we get 14.3. We fill that across to the right, hit F9 to recalc. And our numbers update again. Once you have that, fill that to the right. It's going to be 0, all right, because in this model, again, we're never going to pay off our revolver fully, so we're not going to be keeping any excess cash on our balance sheet. So we have 0 cash at the beginning, 0 at the end. Anything times 0 is 0. But when we go back and we sensitize our model, I'm going to show you how to do that at the beginning of next week's class, because we are out of time right now, and after you've done your homework.